Y'all know what time it is? It's time for Off the. Actually, it's time to talk about the follow up to the breakout Wii U smash hit, Splatoon 2. Splatoon 2 builds on all the ink splatting fun from the original game. It introduces new modes and expands the story with a fun and interesting campaign. The genre of shooters is pretty much a giant sardine can, though. So, can Splatoon ink out the competition, or will it get splatted? Splatoon 2 is a 4v4 third-person online competitive shooter, but it doesn't play like other games in the genre, and honestly, it's quite refreshing. That's not to say there is no offline play, because there is a campaign, but the real joy in the game is online. The main mode for Splatoon 2 is Turf War, where you and 3 friends team up to cover up as much of the battle arena with your colored ink as possible. The team with the more coverage wins the match. Seems simple, but it really isn't. Not only do you want to avoid being killed or splatted, you can't see that, but I'm doing air quotes, by the opposite team, but you also have a finite amount of ink. And the only way to gain more ink, or, again, air quote here, reload, is to swim in your own ink's color. This also works if you want to make a quick getaway from a skirmish. It also works like a pseudo cover system, like one you would find in other cover-based third-person shooters. The very same ink you're shooting is also your cover. With a button press, you'll quickly disappear into the ink and swim around for a getaway or sneak up on an unsuspecting opponent. The ink can also become pretty scarce, so you have to be careful and try your best to coordinate with your teammates. Of course, there are other game modes that have a spin on the Turf War formula. Ranked and league battles crank the ink-tossing fun up to a whole new competitive level. In these modes, the challenges and levels rotate every couple of hours. Things like tower control or splat zones are inky takes on King of the Hill and tower defense. And there are 2 creative modes that are more like a game of football or basketball than anything. Rainmaker and Clam Blitz will task players with collecting an object or multiple objects and taking them towards the enemy's spawn point. Players must first achieve a certain rank in battle modes before moving on to the league battles. For me though, the standout game mode is Salmon Rush. It's essentially horde mode with a Splatoon twist. 4 random strangers are subcontracted by a crusty shrimp, given a specific set of weapons to use, and dropped off on an oil rig or some other type of setting. The object of Salmon Run is to collect as many golden eggs as possible, which are only dropped by the boss salmon. There's also random waves of super deranged salmon, and every once in a while, fog will roll in, or it will get really dark, making visibility almost zero. I don't know what it is, but fighting off wave after wave of deranged fish just feels therapeutic. I just wish me and my fellow subcontractors could apply for work more often. Sadly, Grizzco isn't always open for business. No matter your play style or match type preference, there's likely something here for you. Each match is incredibly frantic and fun. Whether you're out to splat the opponent or simply ink as much territory as possible, you'll find yourself in some pretty hairy situations. There's a variety of weapons that are suited to whatever your playstyle may be. You can choose from traditional pistols to giant paint rollers and even buckets. Each weapon has its own attributes, or special ability, and secondary weapon, like a grenade, sticky bomb, missiles, or curling rocks. Go Canada! Things get especially frantic in the Splat Fests. Splat Fests are special timed event matches. Think of something like an Olympic tournament, but for ink splatting. Every player is given a choice of 2 different, yet very similar things, and is forced to choose a side. So whether you choose mayo over ketchup, or think spoons are superior to forks, you can try and prove your side's dominance on the splatter field. The game is constantly being updated to keep things fresh, because no one likes stale squid, even well into the game's life cycle too. These updates aren't just cosmetic either. The developers are constantly adding new weapons and weapon types, as well as maps, clothing, and other fashionable items. The developers are constantly tweaking the game to make sure it's always balanced for new, pro, and returning players. Of course, any online game can have matchmaking problems or lag and connectivity issues, but because of these updates, it doesn't happen too often. The developers even included a little way to kill time while matchmaking. You can play around with the music. It may seem like nothing, but it's a nice touch. Splatoon controls like most other shooters, with added motion controls for fine-tuning. So if you've played a lot of shooters, you'll be able to pick this one up pretty quickly as well. If you're a fan of cover-based shooters, you'll feel especially at home. The Inklings control like a lot of others in the genre. It's just uniquely Nintendo. There is a small amount of customization, including turning the motion controls off, which I did immediately. Thankfully, there's a low barrier of entry, but don't let the aesthetic fool you. This game is hard to master. On the surface, Splatoon is presented like a very kid-friendly shooter, and it is, especially compared to the hyper-realism of the Battlefields and Call of Duties out there. That doesn't mean it isn't any less competitive. Not only is the gameplay frantic, but the graphics look great and totally suit the overall aesthetic of the game. The ink you shoot looks wet and sticky, and somehow so do the characters. I can just smell the sea salty air swirling around Inkopolis Square. Inkopolis Square is a bustling city square that serves as the game's hub world. From here you can see some of the drawings from other players, as well as purchase fashionable items and new weapons. I just love how this is the way the developers decided to do this. Most games would have you earn money and buy weapons and upgrades through a series of menus, but with Splatoon, there's a real sense of community, and you feel like you're actually in a city square. It's fleshed out with shops, an arcade, a TV studio, and even has a food truck. Each store is dedicated to a different fashion item, and one for new weapons. You can buy shoes, shirts, hats, whatever. Each clothing item has its own bus, so there's lots of reasons to keep going back when new items come into stock. It also makes fashion a central gameplay mechanic. Each store owner is unique and eccentric in their own ways, and this includes the wacky TV hosts. Every time you boot up the game, you get to see the lovely hosts of Off the Hook. They provide you with any news and updates that have happened, as well as tell you if Grizzco is open and what the current online battle stages are, which is great if you've been playing something else for a bit and want to come back to Splatoon. You could assume that a primarily online competitive shooter wouldn't have a very interesting or robust single-player mode. Well, thankfully, you would be wrong. Splatoon 2 features a full-fledged single-player mode with a compelling story that keeps you guessing. They've even released a full-blown expansion to this wonderful story. As a new Inkling in Inkopolis, you are quickly recruited to find out what happened to one of the other citizens. In fact, the other citizen is the loser from the final Splat Fest in the original game. So the story essentially picks up right where the original game left off. While searching for her, you come across an evil plot by the Octarians to steal the Zapfish that power your fair city. So quickly it's on your shoulders to not only find the missing Inkling, but also stop the Octarians. The single-player campaign is split into a few areas where you are tasked with completing multiple short challenge and obstacle levels, collecting Zapfish along the way to the area's boss. In doing so, you learn how to control and use new weapons and abilities that directly translate into the online matches. The challenges are simple at first, very creative, and become pretty difficult later on. Plus, there are tons of hidden things to find that help expand on the story. So, the final verdict for Splatoon 2. For the gameplay, multiple game modes, Splat Fest are a blast, and it's pretty frenetic, so I gave it a 10. For the controls, they are intuitive, not a fan of the motion controls, but at least they are customizable, so I gave it a 9. Presentation, the graphics are beautiful, the ink looks amazing, characters are wonderfully wacky, and the soundtrack is pretty damn good, so I gave it a 9. As for the story, it's fun, challenging, complex, and there are some neat collectibles, so I gave it an 8. That brings the total for Splatoon 2 to a 9 out of 10. Hey everyone, I hope you enjoyed this review of Splatoon 2. If so, please do shoot that subscribe button and hit the bell for notifications. That way you will know when new content comes out. I'm always coming up with new and weird stuff, so stay tuned, and I'll see you in the next video.